Hey guys, Archifantes here with another Prismata game analysis. As promised, this is the video to make up for the one I didn't do last week. So if we look at this set, there's quite a few options. There's Venge Cannon, there's Xeno Guardian, there's Amporilla. Maybe you can even sneak in a defense grid, though that's unlikely because Amporilla's in the set. But the real focus for this video is going to be on the burst damage units, Endotherm Kit and Cluster Bolt. Particularly, I want to sort of present an alternative way to use Cluster Bolt besides just the all-in rush. Cluster Bolt is a very good burst damage unit where you can suddenly threaten 5 damage in one turn. And as we'll see, that sort of burst potential has a lot of uses. Essentially, it converts your green into like pixies almost. Every green resource is like 1.25 damage. You can think of it that way because you can just use the cluster bolts at any time, and that is kind of how this game will go. I am player 1 this set, which means typically I would only be able to get a conduit turn 3 unless I want to cut a drone, but because there's wild drone in the set, I can actually kind of cut a couple corners and sneak in my conduit on turn 2. Opponent just goes for the natural turn 2 conduit as player 2. And I actually, rather than going for, say, Wild Drone Blast Forge or Drone Animus, I just go for a second conduit. And my reasoning is, there is Cluster Bolt in the sets. I definitely want to stockpile some amount of green, because I feel like I will be using Cluster Bolts to some degree. So I'm not going all out for the Cluster Bolt Rush or anything like that. There's a lot of tools in this set to counter that. For example, just Wild Drone spam. Just stacking HP is super good against the Cluster Bolt Rush, and Wild Drone especially is particularly effective because it gets you gold also for the cost of a wall. And I just want to stockpile some green, get some drones. Opponent does go for the Blast Forge here, which means he's going to be getting Xeno Guardian. And rather than also matching him with my Blast Forge, I actually go for Animus. And the reason is, I don't actually like Xeno Guardian super early. I feel like when you rush it out, it's just kind of like an overcosted attacker. It only does 1 damage, and it costs you quite a few resources. And you don't really get to use defense, because your opponent has no attack yet. So essentially, Xeno Guardian sort of over-defends for the first turn or two it comes out if you really rush it. And that is kind of what happens here. He gets the Xeno Guardian, so I just go Rhino Tarsier, and then here I do get the Blast Forge, because my opponent is going to be building 2 Tarsiers this turn, which means I can just get my Xeno Guardian, which will be right on time. When the Tarsiers pop, Xeno Guardian will be up. So here, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get 2 Tarsiers. I had only 3 gold, so I got a drone instead. That's because I did sneak in the second conduit. The second conduit will be very important, as we'll see. It does mean, though, that I am behind on the Tarsier counts. And, well, everything's still going more or less according to plan, but here my opponent goes for the second Animus, and this is the critical turning point of this game. He's still doing 1 damage with Xeno Guardian, so Rhino's plenty enough, but second Animus threatens Amporilla, as we see, with 4 Tarsiers, which is quite a bit of damage, right? He'll be doing 9 damage, and then if he can get his second Amporilla, he'll be doing 12 damage, which is almost impossible to defend with only 15 gold. So the way to kind of beat the Amporilla player is aggression. You want to overwhelm your opponent, force him on defense, force him never to be able to buy an Amporilla, or at the very least, force him to only be able to buy 1 Amporilla. 8 damage is manageable, right? So how do I do that? Well, turns out I have exactly 8 green from my conduits. The math worked out pretty well. So on this turn, I go through a bunch of different options. I look at maybe buying drones, maybe buying a wild drone, but I end up settling on just going for 2 Tarsiers and then also 2 Cluster Bolts. Because of the Cluster Bolts, I basically make it impossible for my opponent to go Amporilla on the following turn. Like I was saying earlier, because I had the 8 green, it was kind of just like stockpiled pixies. I just had 10 damage worth of pixies ready to go at any time. Obviously, it's not like, it doesn't have haste in the way that a pixie would if you just had it on the field that you could just use. But it's just 10 damage that you force your opponent to defend for on the following turn. And it successfully prevents him from getting his Amporilla. So unfortunately, because Cluster Bolt does give your opponent Gauss charges, he was able to kill my 2 wild drones, So that is kind of the drawback of wild drones. Occasionally you'll give your opponents free damage that they can use. But he was not able to get Amporilla. Instead he gets the wall. Actually goes for a Blood Pact, just because it was the most efficient way to defend. And he goes for an Endotherm Kit. So his reasoning is he wants to pressure me, force me on defense, so I can't build more offense and break through. That way he might have a leeway, like a window to get his own Amporilla. But as we see here, I can actually defend pretty easily by just going wall, leaving a drone back. And unfortunately I didn't have enough green to continue cluster bolting. But honestly, the first volley already did its damage. I'm going to wipe out all of his defenders except for Xeno Guardian. And I can continue to pressure his defense with Endotherm Kit being in the set. So at this point, I'm still threatening essentially 15 points of pressure. So there's still no way for my opponent to go for Amporilla. He only has 13 drones. That means if he goes Amporilla, that's his entire turn. So instead, he's forced to double Blood Pact, build wall, force field, and just barely have enough to defend here. And I just go for another Endotherm Kit. This is kind of one of the things. Endotherm Kit right now I do feel is a little bit overpowered. I think its numbers need to be changed somewhat, because it's really easy after you buy the first Endotherm Kit just to force your opponent to buy defense forever for the rest of the game. Every turn from this point on, I can just keep on buying Endotherm Kit, right? And he'd be forced to keep on buying walls, force fields, maybe more Blood Packs until eventually he can't keep up. And that is kind of one of the problems. You obviously need attack behind the Endotherm Kit, but once you get going, it kind of snowballs really quickly. And yeah, my opponent just kind of resigns at this point. I have 16 points of freeze, 8 points of damage. There's no way for my opponent to get Amporilla, and even without it, I just have more damage overall because he bought 3 Blood Packs. And even without the 3 Blood Packs, I would have about the same amount of damage as my opponent. So yeah, it's not really the most exciting game, I guess, but I just kind of wanted to show a little bit about burst damage and sort of that is how you counter Amporilla. Not necessarily burst damage, but just pressure in general, some amount of damage. It just so happens that with Cluster Bolt and Endotherm Kit, both of them are super efficient ways to force your opponent to buy defense. And it was sufficient to win me the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next week on Tuesday, resuming my typical schedule.